Hello and welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, Sudan now becomes the third state to normalize ties with Israel in as many months. The government continues to debate coronavirus restrictions, and today, Israel marks Yom Haaliya, or Immigrants' Day. But what does that look like during a pandemic? Stay tuned for more. Well, both Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Donald Trump promised that there would be more to come, and the proof is in the pudding. The African nation of Sudan now becoming the third Arab Muslim state to normalize with Israel since this summer. And this news also is coming as Israel's cabinet approves the second recent peace agreement with Bahrain. A momentous phone call to start the weekend. United States President Donald Trump congratulating his counterparts in Israel and Sudan on their newly established relations between the two countries. The third historic Israel-Arab peace agreement in as many months, and Israel's fifth peace agreement with an Arab country in general.
Just congratulate all of you. The State of Israel and the Republic of Sudan have agreed to make peace. This is for many, many years they've been at odds, to put it nicely, and to normalize their relations. This will be the third country where we're doing this, and we have many, many more coming. They're coming at us hot and heavy. In the coming weeks, they will meet to negotiate cooperation agreements. You saw that happen with UAE and Bahrain recently in agriculture, technology, aviation.
And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also welcoming the new and latest U.S.-brokered peace agreement, commenting specifically on Sudan's historic political turnaround and its likely effect on the region, especially given that Israel and Sudan have technically been at war for the past 70 years.
אזרחי ישראל, אתמול עשינו עוד צעד לשלום היסטורי, שלום בין ישראל לסודן. אני מזכיר לכם שסודן הייתה מדינת אויב, היא השתתפה במלחמה נגד ישראל. בחרטום בירת סודן, הליגה הערבית הכריזה על 3 תל-אביב מישראל, לא לשלום עם ישראל, לא להכרה בישראל, לא למשא ומתן עם ישראל, כל זה שינינו כמובן.
Meanwhile, aside from just opening trade with Sudan and hurting Iran's illicit trade routes, this agreement also includes some important lines in the sand, specifically that Sudan will officially side with the West against Iran, while labeling Iran's proxy in Lebanon, Hezbollah, a terror group. This being a major step forwards from Sudan's support of Iran until at least 2016. Then Sudan has also agreed to compensate certain American victims of terror attacks and their families to the tune of $335 million. In return, the United States will remove Sudan from the United States' terror sponsor blacklist, which includes the lifting of crippling economic sanctions and the opening of new ties with the United States.
أنا مع التطبيع لأنه بيفتح لنا علاقات الدولية وخاصة مع أمريكا.
يعني إذا تم من ناحية بتاعت نحن كربنا، أنا بقول كلمة كربنا الاتفاق، يعني من ناحية اقتصادية سياسية، بفتكر علينا إحنا ممكن نمشي لقدام بصورة جميلة جدا جدا، لأنه أبسط حاجة يعني مثلا عندك لو مسكنا مرور الطيران عبر السودان للدول اللي إذا مسكنا مثلا الدول الأفريقية نحن بنقني منها الكثير، ودي بتقوم تصلح لنا في الاقتصاد بتاعنا. وإذا مسكنا يعني من ناحية سياسية يعني نحن علاقتنا مع فلسطين محفوظة. يعني بدون أي تغيير، بدون أي يعني لعب من خلف الدول.
Now, as for which country will be next in line to normalize with the Jewish state, Israeli Mossad chief Yossi Cohen is hinting that Oman is on the horizon, with Saudi Arabia waiting for the results of the United States elections to show their hand. Meanwhile, watching the Israel-Sudan events unfolding through a microscope, Israel's Sudanese migrant and asylum-seeking or refugee population is waiting on pins and needles to see what lies in their future. Though of the roughly 6,000 Sudanese nationals still living in the Jewish state, most seem to be excited. The Israeli government has long had a conflicted relationship with its African asylum seekers and migrants. Internal political battles ongoing over the nature of the migrants' arrival, with many arguing that they've come escaping extreme hardships and human rights abuses, while others argue that they've only come for better economic opportunity. Either way, with a new, more moderate government in Sudan, many fears of return have been put aside anyway.
אני לא מפחד. אני לא מפחד אם אני חוזר לסודאן, אני חוזר ישר, אני לא מפחד. אין מישהו מפחיד אותי שם בסודאן. שם הכל בסדר, אחי. עכשיו יש לנו ממשלה חדש, לא כמו מה שהיה.
Still, for many others, of course, the news is received with mixed reactions, specifically from those involved with ongoing asylum applications.
We are very happy about the peace agreement that it seems is going to be actualized between Israel and Sudan, and we are very happy about the progressive situation in Sudan. We hope there will be a real peace and Sudanese asylum seekers will be able to return home safely. Yet there is a need to remember that Israel cannot deport asylum seekers with open asylum claims.
Now, before we get too excited about the news with Sudan, officials are trying to temper expectations, telling the world that this will take time. Nittany Manson with the story.
Sudanese Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok is hailing the newly announced ties between Khartoum and Jerusalem, but it may be too soon to sing praises as the deal cannot be finalized just yet. Sudan's not yet formed parliament will be necessary to pass the deal, and there's already some stiff opposition.
يجب أن ننظر لأي قضية من خلال الانتهاكات التي تطال الشعوب المختلفة. الشعب السوداني الآن أو السودان عموما في مرحلة من المراحل، في مرحلة هشة، وهذه المرحلة لا تتقبل على الإطلاق الحديث عن التطبيق.
سوف تكون العلاقات بين السودان وأمريكا من ناحية رفع السودان من قائمة الدول الراعية للإرهاب، سيكون لذلك نتائج إيجابية على السودان من الناحية الاقتصادية والعملة الصعبة التي ستكون متوفرة لدى السودان من نواحي كثيرة، وعلاقات السودان مع عدة دول أجنبية. أما الناحية السلبية فأعتقد أن التطبيع مع إسرائيل سيكون له وجه من الوجوه المؤثرة سلبا على دولة فلسطين، لأن إسرائيل ما زالت تبني المستوطنات وتستوطن في عدة مدن، فأعتقد أن ذلك سيكون
Meanwhile, Palestinian officials are also again condemning the announcement as a stab in the back, with Hamas claiming that this is nothing more than a political stunt. President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, on the other hand, are still touting the belief that with Israel-PA talks frozen, going around Ramallah and making peace with the rest of the Arab world first is the only logical step.
Joining us now with more on the latest pending peace between Israel and Sudan, Middle East experts and research fellows, Dr. Nir Boms from the Moshe Dayan Center at Tel Aviv University and Dr. Yechiel Shabi from the Begin Sadat Center of Bar Ilan University. Thank you both so much for being with us. Now, Nir, I'm going to start with you. What do you make of this latest peace?
Well, this is a good progress. I think it's important to remind our viewers that just like the peace and the normalization, this is not something that came as a complete surprise. Some of this process has started in the last few years. There has been negotiations. Sudan had made a significant turn in 2016. But of course, the timing of all of this has perhaps a lot to do with other political considerations, including at the White House and including in the context of the timing, perhaps for the U.S. elections and the real effort of the White House to try to seal some additional deals. For Israel, of course, this is a very important development. This is another country and a significant country in Africa that sort of joins the normalization train. And it's very significant because of the history of Sudan and because of the turn that Sudan made, a turn gradually toward the West, away from Iran. And that particular turn is significant for us because of Sudan's role as really becoming an Iranian surrogate in the region. This is also why Israel, at least according to foreign sources, had been active in Sudan militarily, bombing convoys that eventually came from Iran and then from there to Sinai, to Hamas, and to other terrorist proxies around the world. This is a significant move that will take Sudan not just off the terrorist list, hopefully, but also away from the terrorist orbit.
Well, so with that in mind, though, I'd like to ask, because Sudan's government is still in flux. The parliament has not been, put into power just yet, and so they haven't been able to, they won't yet be able to pass this agreement. So how likely is this future government going to pass this agreement. Dr. Shabi, I'll go to you.
When the Sudani people will enjoy from the fruits of these agreements, they might want to stay with it, and it will be good for Sudan and also for the region of East Africa. I think that during the years, we need to do this deal step by step, because in Sudan we have a lot of opposition groups that they are connected to the Islamic radicals regime, the former regime of Omar al-Bashir. So I think that during the years when the fruits will be more realistic, they will continue with this agreement, and they will understand how important it is to the region and to the East Africa states and also to Sudan people.
All right, now, Dr. Bohms, I want to come back to you for this next one, because you just mentioned earlier the timing of this agreement likely having something to do with the campaign trail, with the upcoming presidential elections in the United States. How do you think that this is going to play off either for or against the Trump administration?
Well, look, I'm not an expert to American politics, and it's not for me to prophesize who is going to win the elections. I also believe that, broadly speaking, foreign policy is not an issue of major concern for most Americans. So I'm not sure if that's going to play a significant role or not. But I think the process of pushing this normalization train is playing a major and a significant role in the Middle East. I hear that really daily when I speak to my colleagues from Saudi Arabia, from the Emirates, from the Gulf, now from Africa. This is really a process of reorientation, of trying to move some significant countries into a much stronger pro-Western alliance. In many ways, the United States, that actually almost left the region under Obama, and in many ways under Trump, has not necessarily increased its hold in the region, but with actually smart policy and able to help realign the Middle East. This is significant, and I think will have significant ramifications for the future. Again, as long as we're able to put content in all of these agreements, that we're able to show the people of Sudan, the people of Africa, the people in the Gulf, that it's a win-win formula, that this train of normalization is really able to do some good in the region, and is able to distance the challenge of radicalization, which had killed so many people in Africa and in the Middle East, and many in the Middle East understand that we need to move away from it. This is why it's significant. Well, if it will help the president or not, I will leave it to others.
All right, well, so my final question, which actually pertains to a lot of the conflict in the region that actually is a cause for this problem, is the asylum seeker issue in Israel. Dr. Shabi, is this the answer to the asylum seeker conflict that Israel has been looking for?
When we are talking about this peace, we are creating a new era and a new area also that cuts the front that connected between Afghanistan, Pakistan, through Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, and to the other countries that comes from the East Africa or Africa Horn. And when Israel is dealing with Sudan and cutting this front, it makes a new era in the Middle East.
Dr. Bohms, Dr. Shabi, thank you both so much for being with us.
Good to be here.
You're welcome.
In other news, peace or no peace, anti-government and corruption protests are continuing for their 18th straight weekend. Thousands of demonstrators again arriving in Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv en masse to condemn the government's handling of the coronavirus pandemic, as well as to call for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's ousting in the face of criminal trials set to begin in January. And police are reporting that at least half a dozen arrests followed altercations that ensued. Meanwhile, enjoying a surge in the polls, head of the right-wing Yamina party and former defense minister Naftali Bennett is calling for renewed elections, while positioning himself as a viable candidate for prime minister. But Netanyahu and his Likud party are so far brushing off the attacks, instead calling on Bennett to support unity and not, quote, divisive politics. As for the coronavirus pandemic, with infection numbers continuing to drop over the weekend, Israel's COVID-19 cabinet is again discussing the further easing of lockdown restrictions. Ending last week's coronavirus cabinet meeting with no outcome, Israel's government is this week set to introduce the latest easements in COVID-19 restrictions. And this after, thankfully, another weekend of improving morbidity rates, with Prime Minister Netanyahu discussing some of the latest possible decisions.
אנחנו נעשה מה שצריך, מחר אנחנו נפגשים. אינני מוכן לקבל שחלק מהציבור מקיים את הכללי וחלק לא. אני אציע בחר להטיל קנסות, העלאה דרמטית של קנסות למוסדות וגורמים שלא יכבדו את הוראות הממשלה ומשרד הבריאות. אנחנו יכולים להסכים, לעשות הרבה מאוד להוריד את זה, זה תלוי בכולם.
Likewise, COVID czar Professor Roni Gamzu is saying that if we want the lockdowns to end sooner, then we have to go get tested. Gamzu telling Hebrew media that he has 70,000 daily tests at his disposal that must be used. Though other ministers and government officials are just focused on the exit. Israel's economy ministry announcing the lifting of the blanket ban on foreigners entering the country. So as of now, business tourists from green countries will be allowed to come to Israel for up to a week, and without a COVID-19 test or the need to self-isolate. Finance Minister Israel Katz, meanwhile, is also calling for street shops, hair salons, and other service industry businesses to be reopened by the 1st of November, along with younger school classrooms, which are set to return at the same time. But again, Netanyahu is drawing attention to the data as his guide, and not political demands.
אני אומר מראש, אם התחלואה תרד, ההגבלות תרדנה. אם התחלואה תעלה, ההגבלות תעלנה. אין לנו ברירה. זו הדרך היחידה להבטיח את החיים. אני יודע שזה קשה, אני יודע שיש קשיים לעצמאים, יש קשיים לעסקים, אנחנו עזרנו לכם ונעזור לכם עוד. אנחנו חייבים לעשות זאת. אבל אנחנו לא על חשבון החיים. אנחנו נעשה מה שצריך.
Well, as of now, the total confirmed number of active infections in Israel has dropped to 15,833, 548 still remaining in serious condition, and the death toll rising to 2,372. Moving on, today in Israel, we mark annual Yom Haaliya, or Immigration Day, in which the country celebrates all of the olim, or immigrants who have made the major choice to call Israel home. But of course, Aliyah numbers are a bit down in 2020, and as with all other things, amidst the pandemic, there won't be any parades this year. Still, despite the virus and the strain that it's placed on new arrivals, at least 15,000 Jews emigrated to Israel since January, and at least 35,500 Aliyah applications were opened, accounting for a 166% spike in the number of petitions from North America alone. So with annual Aliyah Day upon us, but with little to no fanfare, the question is, how are our new olim, or Israeli immigrants, doing? With us to discuss on our immigrant panel, we have educator at the AMHSI and clinical art therapist Adi Ben-Arzi, assistant director at Israel XP from Bar-Ilan University, Meir Balovsky, and our very own ILTV producer, Chana Rifkin. Thank you all so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very happy to introduce you guys. So first of all, when did you first make Aliyah, and what were your reasons? I'll start with you.
Wow, so I guess you can loosely call me a new Ole. I made Aliyah in 2004, so that's about
not quite new.
Okay, so again, my accent will always make me Ole Chadash, so I get to maintain that moniker as long as my accent is clearly Canadian. I made Aliyah from Canada, from Toronto in 2004, and why? Okay, loosely, yes, for the classic ideological reasons. My wife and I, we grew up in Toronto believing Israel is our homeland, and in a nutshell, we had an opportunity to make Aliyah with our family, and we did not want to look back at life and say we didn't take advantage of that. And we said, let's make this, we keep talking about Israel as a homeland, let's make it a reality.
Fair enough. Adi, I know you're with us right now on Zoom. What were your reasons for moving here? And is Israel living up to all of your expectations so far?
Absolutely. I'm both Israeli and American, so I always had a really strong connection to Israel. I actually made the decision to move here 2 years ago when my niece was born. So it was really important for me to be here, connected to my family and my home. It's going great.
Chana, saving the best for last, of course. How long ago did you move to Israel?
I officially moved here in 2018, the beginning of 2018. But I've been here much longer than that. And I came here because I came here on actually Mayor's gap year.
Oh, yeah?
And and after that I decided to stay, and I went here for college, and then I loved it.
How has your life in Israel been affected this year by coronavirus?
So when coronavirus started, I was actually still in the army, in the Israeli army, and I decided to extend my service because I thought it would be the best bet because we didn't really know what was going to happen. And then after I got released, that actually kind of saved me, to tell you the truth. And then after I got released, I came here. So, yeah.
So Adi, back to you really quick then. You know, are you relying on your support network? I mean, how are you getting by in this difficult time?
I'm really fortunate to have a career path that allows me to still practice what I do. I educate incredible American students who had permission to still come for a study abroad semester of high school at the JNF AMHSI. So I'm an educator there, and I'm also an art therapist and a clinical mental health counselor. And we all know, especially in the world of Corona, there's a heightened need for that.
There's no shortage of the need for mental health counseling. Meir, I guess some of the question, you know, how you've been here now for 16 some odd years. You know, how has your network maybe expanded? How are you dealing with the virus?
Well, again, to be honest, given our global village we have with just everything from social media and to be able to reach out to like friends and family all the time, aside from having, you know, the family and friends that are close by, and given the fact that it's a pandemic and the whole world's dealing with it, the support network is actually enormous because considering that, you know, there's always people who you can sympathize with, can reach out to, that can give you some advice, some guidance, how are you dealing with this and that and the other. So it is an awkward blessing that, well, it's a terrible blessing, but it's a blessing that everyone's dealing with the same thing in some way. So as far as reaching out and getting ideas, how to manage your time, how to process information, how to manage with the ever-changing rules, you're not going about it alone. And I think that there is like a strong silver lining that we can then depend on, not just your immediate friends and family, but your really global network of everyone you know to really kind of help you guide through these uncertain times.
So I guess my final question, which I'll ask all three of you, whoever wants to jump in first, how are you spending your Aliyah day? How are you going to be spending the rest of today? I mean, we still got some time.
Oh, I've heard there's a new amazing food called falafel, which I've got to try out. And tell you, I've heard that it's
brand new.
It's an Israeli experience. I got it. I mean, after 16, 17 years, you got to try these things out. It's all about trying new things.
Of course, obviously. Hannah?
I think I'm gonna go home. I'm gonna also grab some falafel, and I'm gonna work on tomorrow's show.
It's Aliyah Day specialty. It's falafel. Adi, finally, of course, how are you spending the rest of your celebratory Aliyah Day?
I have really fantastic homemade kebabs.
It's all
ready to
celebrate.
be kitchen with pita ala gas, so it doesn't get more Israeli than that, right?
It's like, as I know we're all Olim here, but it's the most Israeli thing I've ever heard that everybody here answered, I'm celebrating today with food.
That's the most Jewish answer possible.
It is the most Israeli thing ever. All right, well, I want to thank all of you for coming in or speaking with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All right, now for our final story tonight, we close, unfortunately, with some somber news. Treasured Israeli comedy star and actor Yehuda Barkan has passed away due to complications with the coronavirus. Prime Minister Netanyahu offering his eulogy for the 75-year-old actor over the weekend. And Barkan, whose 55-year career first took off on Israeli radio before moving into film in the early 70s, is best remembered for his wit, his humor, and his practical jokes. President Reuven Rivlin calling him a wellspring of joy. We send out our deepest condolences to the Barkan family and to everyone else who has also lost a loved one or a friend during this horrible pandemic. Now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight calls for it to be clear to partly cloudy with lows resting at 65 degrees Fahrenheit or 18 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow you can expect highs averaging around 88 degrees Fahrenheit or 31 degrees Celsius. And now before we go, of course, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel. I'm assuming we're going to cut to it. Good stretch. Oh, what a pro. Upward dog, I guess. He's really... Ooh, and the downward dog. If he's teaching classes, I'm signing up. But that is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.38 shekels to the American dollar and 2.57 shekels to the Canadian dollar. For more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube and Roku TV pages. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you so much for watching.